To talk about the significance of this visit, let's cross over to the States, where we can now speak to former Nevada State Republican Chairwoman Amy Tarkanian. Amy, I'm tempted to say if you thought the situation in Israel was bad now, wait until Joe Biden gets there. What will his visit achieve?
Sure. Well, there's a New York Times article that came out this morning, and it lists 4 items. One of them being just to solidify the support that America is going to give to Israel. The fact that we're trying to avoid escalation, and that you want to focus on strategy, not emotion. And then, of course, you want to rescue the hostages. And so I think that's really what his whole focus is, on the reason why he's making this trip.
Yeah, no, so Secretary of State Antony Blinken has already been locked in deep talks with Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister. So I think the process you're talking about is already underway. It does seem to be a priority on the part of America, on the part of the president and his men and women, of course, that to persuade Israel to exercise restraint in this imminent invasion. Would you echo the feeling that that is important, or do you feel that Israel must avenge what happened to it and must show the world that it will avenge what happened to it?
Well, I think they've made themselves pretty clear that they're not going to give any advice on any military exercises or their strategy. And most Americans believe that Israel does have a right to defend itself. And it's unfortunate that it has become so barbaric. This is the type of war crimes that you would never imagine that would be taking place, that Hamas has actually went forward with. And the kidnapping of, like I mentioned, American hostages. A lot of the Americans that are there are dual citizens. And so it is our primary focus to try and make sure that we get those people home safe.
I understand that America's already sent 2,000 troops to the region. There's at least one American warship in the Eastern Mediterranean, keeping an eye on the situation. What will those troops be used for, in your understanding, Amy?
They are going to be used for anything that deals with the medical profession and humanitarian aid. They are not being sent in to fight. And so we do need to make that very clear, because we obviously don't want to anger any other neighboring nations, thinking that we are completely overstepping and participating at a completely different level than may be propagandized.
Now, in terms of what the American efforts right now, which I think, as I say, is definitely to try urge restraint to Benjamin Netanyahu, I'm assuming that America, President Biden, Antony Blinken, are very concerned, as we are here in Britain, as everyone is all over the world, about the potential escalation of this conflict. Obviously, there is going to be a war between Israel and Hamas, and that land invasion by almost 400,000 Israeli forces will happen soon. But we are also hearing that tension and aggression on the northern border, where Hezbollah, a similar terrorist organization to Hamas, Iranian-funded, are stepping up their antics, firing rockets, Israel warning them. And possibly even more alarmingly, Iran is now saying, talking in terms of a preemptive strike the moment that Israel moves into Gaza. So we are talking about potentially a full-scale Middle Eastern war here. I mean, good for America for trying to avert that. But I've got to say, Amy, it sounds to me like a forlorn task to stop this conflict escalating to an alarming extent.
Yes, I would agree. And I think that's what most people are afraid of. You hear World War III, all the time now. It's sitting there in the back of people's minds. And, we have to understand I guess to some degree, that not everybody thinks the same way we do. Not everybody is wanting to be diplomatic. Not everybody is willing to come to the table and have a civilized conversation. You know, these are decades upon decades worth of anger and tension that have been building up. And so I think now President Biden going over there, yes, it's going to be a double-edged sword, because you're going to have, as you mentioned, you're going to have neighboring countries that already are not thrilled with us. And so it's going to enrage them to some degree, even though he's trying to go over there to calm things down. So this is not going to be an easy task for President Biden at all.
Can you, I want to talk about Donald Trump in just a second, but can you describe America's reaction to what's happening in Israel? Here in Britain, it's been kind of strange and ambivalent insofar as, of course, like everyone else, we were utterly shocked by Hamas's sudden, unexpected invasion and the grotesque atrocities they committed. However, the reaction back in Britain has been kind of strange insofar as most of the demonstrations and the protests have been in favour of Palestine, pro-Palestine. You know, everybody draped in flags, marching up and down the streets, free Palestine. So it seems like many of the people, or some people in Britain, are blaming Israel for being attacked, which is kind of strange. What about the American people? How are they viewing what's going on?
Unfortunately, there is some of that happening here, and we're actually seeing it on a number of university campuses. And so you're having comments coming out in favor not just of Palestine, but also of Hamas to some degree. And it's been quite alarming. So it's not just students, it's also some professors, which is quite perplexing, because Hamas obviously is the one who started it. We wouldn't be talking today about this if they hadn't gone in and done the atrocities that they accomplished. So yes, we are unfortunately seeing some of that. We've also had now a number of scenarios where unfortunately people are attacking each other. We had a 6-year-old Muslim boy that was killed and his mother was severely injured. And we also had a terrorist who plowed into, I think, a half dozen people in California. And so we're now starting to fear that there's going to be an uptick in this type of behavior or misbehavior, if you will.
Let's talk about this shocking story in Chicago, the stabbing of a 6-year-old boy, Joseph Tuber, and the serious wounding of a 32-year-old woman. The attack is being seen as a hate crime after the suspects singled out the victims because of their Islamic faith, and as a response to the war between Israel and Hamas. A 71-year-old man has been arrested. Amy, you've just been alluding to it, but this is extremely worrying when people respond with these kind of appalling crimes. What do you make of it all?
Sure. Well, I mean, you're obviously dealing with people who are brainwashed and who are mentally ill. That's the only way to describe this, because if you are actually thinking that a 6-year-old boy is going to be an evil human being, there's something severely wrong with you. He can't control that he's being raised as a certain religion. And just because he is a certain religion doesn't mean that he is going to be participating in Islamist jihad when he gets older. Muslims do not associate themselves with Hamas. That is Islamic jihadists, and they are completely separate in the way that they behave and the way that they carry themselves. So it's very troubling.
It certainly is. Now let's move on to Donald Trump. The former US president is currently seeking vindication in a High Court challenge here in London over claims he bribed officials and took part in sex parties in Russia. The ex-president has said he would like to fly to London and give evidence in the British court where his case is being heard. Was he wronged here, Amy? Were these total lies about what he allegedly got up to in Moscow?
No, and actually, the tough thing is that finding defamation is so difficult. There's a fine line in order to win a defamation lawsuit, and that's what he would be dealing with. And so, when you have somebody such as Hillary Clinton and his other opponents who paid for this, Mr. Steele is the one who, claimed to have the findings of this situation. And then he's the one who issued it to the FBI, which in turn, gave it to a US senator. And then the media gleefully ran with it, even though there was no truth to it. So even though I'm not necessarily a fan of President Trump at this time, I think he has every right to go ahead and defend himself in this situation.
Yes, indeed. Very intriguing to see him. I mean, we're used to seeing him in American courts. Looks like we'll see him in a British court pretty damn soon. Let me just ask you on a general basis, Amy. Donald Trump, is he the next president of the United States? I think he's a shoo-in, almost locked in as the Republican candidate. Can he win?
This whole thing has just been a embarrassing circus. You will find that most people do not want a rematch of President Biden versus President Trump at all. But if we are stuck with either one of those two, President Biden has done such a terrible job, especially with our economy, and the fact that we see inflation rising. Still, we've got gas prices skyrocketing. Now you can get gas once again in California for $7 a gallon. There's no way people can continue living like this. So yes, he very well could be. And I never thought I'd be saying that.
I'll tell you what, $7 a gallon, the equivalent over here, people will be queuing around the block for that kind of bargain price. But what about Trump's uncanny ability to, every time he gets indicted or he gets a new legal problem, his popularity rises? Who are the people that are supporting him? Why do they like him the more trouble he is in? And again, let me just press you on this. Do you think he will be the next president of the United States of America?
I certainly hope not. I think he has caused a lot of havoc with our election system, especially with him claiming that his election was stolen. It really hurt our democracy. It put it into people's minds that their votes really don't matter, and I don't think that's acceptable. I would hope that the Democrats come up with another candidate, or that Republicans actually come to their senses and choose another one of the many great options that we do have. But it just doesn't seem that way. And it seems that his base is hell-bent on sticking with him no matter what, because he's really excellent at bringing people into the fold of victimhood. So he has his famous line where he says, "They're not coming after me, they're coming at me for you," something along those lines. And so he uses lines like that constantly in his email blasts, on his Truth Social, where he brings everyone under his tent and makes them feel like they could be the next victim if they don't support him.
Yeah, and Joe Biden, for all his many strengths, I can't think of any offhand, but he's a lousy campaigner. And Donald Trump, for all his problems, is one hell of a fantastic campaigner. So if it comes to a straight race between those two old guys, Trump's going to win, isn't he?
It's just, I know you want me to say yes or no, but it's a wild card scenario. I know it's a wild card scenario because I know that there's people who, I hate to use the word hate, but literally hate Donald Trump so much that they might be willing to just stomach, hold their nose and vote for President Biden again, if God forbid he's still the Democrats' nominee. So, I think most people, when you look at polling, they're concerned with President Biden's age, with his mental capacity, and with the fact that, he always seems to be kind of shuffling around, lost aimlessly. And then with President Trump, he comes across as this very strong, he's very, very bullish, but people are concerned about his mouth and his rhetoric. So there's problems with both. So I really don't know at this point.
I think a lot of Americans feel exactly the same way. Amy, great to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time. That's Amy Tarkanian, former Republican senator for Nevada.